The scholarship I created for her dream job was her ticket to a new life with the professor who judged it. A betrayal painted not in the bold, declarative strokes of a modern canvas, but in the meticulous, accumulating glazes of a Renaissance master, each layer of deceit transparent on its own, but forming an opaque, perfect falsehood when viewed as a whole. My wife, Lena, didn't merely have a passion for art restoration. She possessed a sacred, all-consuming vocation for it. It was the core of her identity, the lens through which she viewed the world. Long before I, a man of spreadsheets and market trends, wandered into her frame. We met in the hushed, marble echo of the museum cafe, her fingers stained with a faint, persistent smudge of ochre pigment, even after a full day at her administrative job at a commercial gallery. I was there killing time before a client meeting, drawn to the intensity with which she was sketching the Corinthian capital of a column in the atrium. When she dropped her pencil, I retrieved it, and she launched into an explanation of the column's flaws, its later restoration, and the ethical dilemma of using modern resin. I was a captive audience of one, mesmerized less by the technicalities and more by the fervent, luminous guardian of beauty she revealed herself to be. I fell in love not just with the woman, but with the priestess of preservation she was inside. But vocation is a fragile thing under the weight of economic reality. Passion doesn't pay down six-figure student loans or finance master's degrees from elite European institutes like the Palazzo Spinelli in Florence. Life, with its mundane and relentless gravity, had trapped her. Her dreams were like the fragile papyri she sometimes described with a quiet, aching reverence too delicate for the harsh light of day, best kept in climate-controlled darkness. I watched over 5 years of marriage the slow, incremental dimming of that interior light. Her talk of someday grew fainter, replaced by a practical, resigned chatter about gallery sales targets and difficult clients. The smudges on her fingers appeared less often. It was a kind of dying, and I felt powerless to stop it. My own success was of a different, duller currency. I was a financial strategist, adept at making capital flow and multiply in silent, digital columns. My love for Lena was the most vivid, unquantifiable asset on my personal balance sheet. Seeing it depreciate through her silent despair was a liability I couldn't hedge. So I decided to become not just a husband, but a patron, a creator of realities. I would architect her destiny. The Lena Vasiliou Fellowship in Art Conservation was my Sistine Chapel, my masterpiece of love built not with brushstrokes, but with legal clauses, wire transfers, and strategic networking. I structured it as a private, merit-based grant, funding a full year of study at the Palazzo, covering not only the exorbitant tuition, but also materials, a generous living stipend, and a coveted internship with a major institution. The final masterful touch was securing a luminary for the selection committee, Professor Eris Thorne. Thorne was a legend, a restorer of impossible Renaissance frescoes, a man whose scholarly papers Lena could quote from memory, whose name was spoken in whispers of reverence in the halls she yearned to walk. Getting him required calling in favors that cost me significant social and professional capital introductions to wealthy donors for his pet projects, strategic advice for a nonprofit board he sat on. But the imagined image of Lena's face, transformed by shock and joy upon seeing his name on the official committee document, was worth every transactional compromise. I was building a bridge from my world of numbers to her world of beauty, and Professor Thorne was the keystone. The night the formal letter arrived, embossed with the Palazzo's crest, she didn't cry. She emitted a sound I can only describe as a pure, unadulterated sonic boom of joy. It shattered the quiet of our apartment. She leaped into my arms, a force of nature, covering my face in kisses, her words tumbling over themselves. "You did this! You built this! It's a miracle!" In that moment, I was not a financier. I was a deity. I had harnessed the cold, logical power of my universe to fuel the beautiful, rarefied fire of hers. I had made her dream tangible, and her gratitude was my paradise. Her year abroad began as a whirlwind of excited nightly video calls. She was a woman reborn. Her features, which had grown still and careful, were again animated, her hands constantly in motion, as she described the tactile thrill of applying a rabbit skin glue size to a centuries-old poplar panel, the spectral smell of linseed oil and ancient stone dust that hung in the restoration lab. "It's like breathing history," she said, her eyes wide. And Professor Thorne, of course, was a constant, benevolent presence in her narratives. "He's even more brilliant in person," she'd gush, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "So demanding, almost severe, but he sees the artist's intention in the cracks. He says I have a palpable sensitivity to the work's soul." I would nod, grinning like a fool, swelling with a pride so profound it bordered on pain. My plan was unfolding with flawless precision. I was the master strategist, watching my most important investment yield immeasurable returns in human happiness. The first hairline crack in my perfect edifice was a subtle shift in digital cadence. The daily rambling video calls became every other day, then settled into a weekly appointment that sometimes felt rushed. Her texts, once delightful bursts of observation. A pigeon got into the lab and everyone screamed like the Visigoths were at the gates, grew shorter, more functional. In the lab, late with the professor on the Donatello documentation. Can't talk. Pudtibern. 3-day field trip to Siena to study the Maista. Spotty service. I diligently dismissed it. This was immersion. This was the all-consuming focus of the true scholar I had unleashed. She was living her dream. To begrudge her absorption would be the act of a small, insecure man. I was the steady earth, and she was the brilliant, wandering comet. My role was to hold the orbit. When she returned home for the 2-week Christmas break, the change was profound and unsettling. She was not distant, but polished, transformed. Her hair, once a wild, dark mane she'd tie up with a pencil, was now styled in an elegant, seemingly effortless chignon. She wore clothes of a simpler, more expensive cut Italian linen, fine wool that spoke of a sensibility refined far beyond the boutique sales she used to haunt. She talked, but it was a new kind of talking. She spoke of the particular quality of the Lumiere in the Florentine afternoon and the ethical burden of intervention versus preservation, with a calm, confident authority that subtly but definitively excluded me. It was a language of initiation, and I was uninitiated. Our intimacy, once easy and warm, now felt like a performance she was conducting. Careful, considered, and ultimately rushed, as if she were checking a box on a to-do list before returning to her real life. I blamed jet lag. I blamed the intellectual high of her rarefied new world. I was the grounding foundation, and foundations by their nature are walked upon and rarely looked at. The collapse, when it came, was triggered by a piece of forgotten, dormant technology. Lena had left her older model tablet behind when she returned for her final decisive semester. One rain-slanted Sunday, needing a second screen to parse a complex quarterly report, I powered it up. It connected to our Wi-Fi and automatically began syncing with our shared cloud storage. A notification popped up for a recently updated album. Ferenzi, reference and inspiration, private. My heart, ever the optimistic fool, leapt. Here, I thought, were the treasures of her year, the visual notes of her awakening. I opened it. The gallery that loaded was a curated exhibition of my annihilation. These were not clinical shots of flaking vermilion or infrared reflectograms. They were photographs of a life, her life, and his. Professor Eris Thorne was not the wizened, kindly academic I had pictorially conjured. He was in his late 40s, with the sharp, aquiline features of a Roman coin, silver threading his thick dark hair at the temples. He had an artist's hands long-fingered, expressive, currently holding a glass of ruby red wine. There they were, leaning against the sun-warmed terracotta balustrade of a terrace, the ochre dome of the Duomo swelling in the background like a perfect, distant bubble. Another photo, taken in a sun-drenched, book-choked study. His study, as later emails confirmed, showed her laughing, head thrown back, as he pointed to something on a parchment unrolled on a vast oak table. The lighting was golden, intimate, the very air seeming to hold its breath. But the most devastating image was a candid, likely taken by a timer or a careless friend, their hands resting side by side on a sun-bleached stone wall in some hidden courtyard. their fingers loosely, comfortably intertwined. It was a photograph not of stolen passion, but of settled, quiet intimacy. This was not a student with a crush. This was a partnership being documented. This was a shared life, blooming in the Italian sunlight that my money was paying for. A cold, surgical numbness descended, wrapping my heart in a permafrost. The emotional shock was so immense it bypassed feeling entirely and went straight to a hyper-analytical state. I became an archaeologist of my own betrayal. The tablet was my excavation site. I found her email drafts folder, synced from her primary account. The correspondence with Thorn was a masterpiece of duplicity, written in a code of academic and artistic reverence that masked its true purpose. They discussed the Lena Vassiliou Fellowship, not as her award, but as our initial funding vehicle. Thorn wrote, "The stipend structure you described is remarkably, almost presciently, flexible. It provides the perfect, untraceable foundation for the permanent collection we have envisioned. Your husband's continued professional success is, ironically, the best guarantor of our project's long-term viability. He is, in a sense, our most reliable patron." Lena's reply, sent a day later, was the scalpel that severed my last nerve. "I know. It's the one thread I still have to manage with care. He is so unbearably proud of what he built for me. He walks around like an architect who has constructed a cathedral. He doesn't yet see that he has merely provided the quarry from which we will build our own city. The fellowship isn't my prize. It's my dowry." The word dowry hung in the silent room, a toxic, echoing bell. My love, my sacrifice, my strategic genius, all of it was just seed capital. Venture funding for their startup. I was the oblivious angel investor, the useful idiot whose money and connections were building the platform from which they would launch their shared future. The scholarship wasn't a bridge for her. It was a drawbridge she had pulled up behind her, leaving me stranded on the barren side of the moat, holding the empty bag of my own generosity. Their project was their life together. Thorn, the emails detailed, had a prestigious, well-remunerated position being curated for him at a private museum in Basel. Lena's postdoctoral research, for which I was already sketching plans for a second, even more generous fellowship phase, was to be her visa, her intellectual cover, her ticket to Switzerland. The emotional realization was a silent, internal detonation. I sat in my home office, the gray rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, surrounded by the trophies of my success. The ergonomic chair, the Bloomberg terminal screens, the framed deal toys from successful mergers, and felt like the emperor of a vast, empty desert. They had taken the very lexicon of my affection planning, investment, securing a future, and used it as the clinical blueprint for my obsolescence. Rage arrived, but it was a cold, crystalline, and purposeful thing. They saw me as a financier, a bland source of funds, a human ATM. So be it. I would show them the destructive potential of capital when it is recalled, when it is weaponized, when it turns from a patron to a prosecutor. My revenge would be an audit, a total, forensic, and merciless audit of their little venture. First, I froze the assets. As the sole trustee and funder of the fellowship, I had absolute control. A terse 15-minute call with my lawyer and our private banker suspended all future disbursements. The reason cited was a mandatory, comprehensive financial and ethical review to ensure the fellowship's long-term sustainability and alignment with its original charitable goals. The email I sent to Lena was a small masterpiece of plausible, loving bureaucracy. "Darling, just some tedious fiduciary housekeeping to ensure the fellowship can help others as it helped you. Might cause a slight delay in your next stipend, but it's for the greater good. So proud of you." The panic in her reply was palpable, though she tried to cloak it in understanding. "Of course, whatever you need to do. The work here is so demanding anyway," the subtext screamed. Phase 2 targeted Professor Thorn's kingdom. In his world, reputation was the only currency that mattered. Through discreet, high-paying contacts in the art investment and museum philanthropy circles, I learned his impending position in Basel was less a curatorial sinecure and more a desperate fundraising gambit by a financially shaky institution. His value was his name, his prestige, his ability to attract patronage. I began to anonymously, meticulously poison that well. From a newly created, untraceable email account tied to a convincing digital footprint of a concerned Swiss philanthropist, I sent carefully worded inquiries to the museum's board chairman and its ethics committee. The language was velvet-lined steel. While admiring Professor Thorne's oeuvre, one wonders about the propriety of a senior academic serving as both judge and effectively co-beneficiary of a private grant awarded to a student with whom he now appears to share a close, personal, and financially intertwined professional partnership. Perhaps the museum's robust ethical guidelines have already reviewed this? I didn't accuse. I merely wondered, planting a seed of doubt in the most fertile soil imaginable, the mind of a wealthy trustee with a fear of scandal. My masterstroke was to become a rival patron, a ghostly Medici with a vendetta. Using a newly established shell company headquartered in Luxembourg, I reached out to the directorship of the Palazzo Spinelli with a transformative proposition, a substantial multi-year grant dedicated to innovative technologies and conservation science. The sum dwarfed the endowment of the Lena Vassiliou Fellowship. The condition, however, was the grant required a new, fully international and independent academic committee. The research focus was to be on algorithmic analysis of material decay and non-invasive nanorestoration, pointedly moving away from what the proposal termed the traditional author-driven and personality-centric model of restoration. Aquar. It was a direct, professional missile aimed at the heart of Thorne's old-school, guru-like methodology. I made the donation anonymously, but the message to the Institute's director, a pragmatic administrator, was clear. A new, deeper well of funding had appeared, and its water was antithetical to Professor Thorne's garden. I was starving his influence, making him a liability, not an asset to Lena's carefully plotted future. The finale was not a confrontation, but a piece of brutal drawing room theater. Lena returned home after her program ended, her diploma a shield, her future with Thorne a castle she believed was nearly built. She was a live wire of tense anticipation, waiting for the frozen funds to thaw, for the next phase to begin. I planned a celebration and future vision dinner at an impossibly expensive, minimalist restaurant. I invited a handful of our closest, most perceptive friends, people who knew the story of the fellowship, who had seen her off. I toasted her, my voice thick with a perfectly calibrated mix of pride and sorrow. To my brilliant, extraordinary wife, I began, glass raised, and to the Lena Vassiliou Fellowship, which made this rebirth possible. Creating it has been the most rewarding project of my life. I paused, letting the sentimental murmurs settle. In fact, I continued, my tone shifting subtly to one of thoughtful, strategic philanthropy, the experience has inspired my next, and perhaps most important, venture. I've decided to wind down the fellowship and reallocate its entire capital into a new initiative. I could see her fork freeze midair. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide with dawning horror. The Art Conservation Ethics and Transparency Initiative. It will fund independent research and publish universal guidelines on conflicts of interest in academic and cultural funding, with a special focus on intimate relationships between selection committee members and grant recipients. I've already secured a memorandum of understanding with Professor Thorne's own institute at the Palazzo Spinelli as the inaugural research partner. Their director was remarkably enthusiastic. He said the field desperately needs to modernize its reputation in this area. The color drained from Lena's face, leaving her looking like a marble effigy of herself. The friends at the table fell into a stunned, awkward silence, sensing a seismic rupture beneath the polished surface of the evening. In that excruciating moment, she saw the entirety of my counter-operation. I hadn't just cut off the money. I had weaponized the very architecture of their betrayal. I was preparing to publicly dissect their relationship as a case study in ethical failure. Her glorious future with Thorne was about to become a cautionary tale in academic journals, a stain that would make him unemployable at any reputable institution and brand her forever as the woman who fucked her way to a scholarship. The permanent collection of their dreams would be a collection of evidence in a published paper. The aftermath was a quiet, brutal unraveling. Thorne, sensing the incoming tsunami of scandal and the evaporation of his Swiss haven, distanced himself from Lena with the cowardly speed of a man who prized his reputation above all else. The fellowship was formally dissolved, its legacy not one of artistic patronage, but of ignominy. Our divorce was swift. The prenuptial agreement held. She received a modest settlement, a fraction of what she would have had as my wife, and nothing from the fellowship's corpse. Now I live surrounded by a different kind of quiet. The apartment is all clean lines and cold light. I keep the bottle of Tuscan olive oil. It is my memento mori. The scholarship I crafted was meant to be the perfect protective varnish, the isolating layer that would allow her genius to shine for centuries. Instead, it became the volatile solvent that stripped every layer of pretense away, revealing the rotten wood beneath our marriage. I gave her the ultimate gift, the means to her own authenticity, and with devastating, crystalline clarity, she used it to show me that her authentic self had no place for me. The final devastating lesson of patronage is that you can fund the masterpiece, you can provide the hall, you can even write the plaque. But once it's on the wall, you have no say in who stands before it, what they see, or whose hand they hold in the dim, reverent light. You become a footnote, a name in the catalogue raisonné, a detail easily overlooked by those captivated by the beauty of the finished work.